Hello everyone, welcome back to the little book corner. Today we're gonna talk about books that I've never talked about on this channel, but probably should. Either because I never talk about them, or because you guys keep asking me about them. So hop into something, oh my gosh. I wanted to say like, you know, get comfortable, and I started saying hop into something comfy, which shows that I've been watching way too much Yoga with Adriene, because that's what she always says at the beginning. Wow, okay. But yeah, you know, hop into something comfy, get comfortable, get a little snack. I wish I had a snack. Do I have a snack? I don't. I ate all my snacks yesterday. Get yourself something nice to drink. I have a glass of water because hydration is key. If you haven't drunk any water yet today, go do that now. This is a self-care point. And today we're just gonna do a good old sit down, let's talk about some books video. So I've compiled a list of books that either you guys ask me about very often, which shows me that I should probably talk about them a little more often, or books that I've simply never mentioned on this channel because when I read them, I wasn't on YouTube. Because I kind of disappeared from YouTube for like 2 years. I disappeared into a magical forest. It was very calming, very nice, except for when the zombies started attacking. Anyway, I'm back now. I have 8 books to go through, so let's just begin. The first book that I want to talk about is A Sorcery of Thorns, which to me is a really great example of, you know, a book that's really popular at one point. Like, it was really popular almost 2 years ago, and then it just kind of disappears into oblivion and no one really talks about it anymore. Or at least I just remember everyone was raving about this book, so I bought it, and right now like I've never really heard anyone talking about this story anymore. And I feel like there are a lot of books like that nowadays that get super popular, super hype for a little while, and then within like half a year the excitement dies off and it just gets replaced by very similar new hyped books. To me, Sorcery of Thorns was kind of like that. It is a standalone fantasy, which is nice, about a girl who starts working. I don't even really remember what it was about. She worked in this like big library, had like this connection to magical books, and she kind of had to go on this adventure to save the world from evil. I remember that it was very magical, very much that like library magic atmosphere that was really nice. It has some really memorable side characters that I really liked, but not the main character. She was one of those main characters that was just extremely bland. There was not much to her, and everything got so easy for her. Like, there were so many moments that I was reading this book and I was like, ooh, oh, this is such like a big challenge that's coming up now. This is definitely gonna be like a super tense, heart-wrenching chapter where we see her like struggling with danger. Oh, she already solved the problem. She's already moving on. Okay. That was easy. That, and we also have a very just cliche, mustache twirling, evil villain. So altogether, it was like fun and magical, but it didn't really blow me away. And the thing is, I initially gave it 3 stars because I was like, this was fun. And I later lowered it to 2 stars because I realized, well, I remember nothing. So I wasn't a big fan. That's what I'm trying to say, I think. Then, next up we have a non-fiction book. You guys know that I talk about Sapiens and rave about Sapiens a lot. So I get a lot of questions or comments from you guys telling me to read Homo Deus, or you're asking me what I thought of it. And actually, I already read it. I read it in the 2-year period that I wasn't on YouTube. But I did read Homo Deus. I did enjoy it, but not as much as Sapiens at all. Where Sapiens is kind of a historical account of like humankind from the beginning of Homo sapiens to now, Homo Deus is more like speculation about the future, and it's also the book where you really start to realize just how much of what Yuval Noah Harari is saying is mostly just his own theories, his own speculation, which is really interesting to read, but also you don't really learn as much information from it. Like, I remember reading Sapiens and really learning a lot of new things, but when I was reading Homo Deus, personally, it just didn't really teach me as much, or didn't really, you know, change my way of looking at the world as much, which is of course going to be super different from person to person. Maybe you actually learned way more from Homo Deus than from Sapiens. That just completely depends on what you already know and what you don't. But personally, I enjoyed this one, but didn't really hit me as much as Sapiens did, and I gave it 3 stars. I wish I could say more about this book, but stupidly enough, I didn't make notes on this book because I read this book in the time that I did not yet make notes on my nonfiction books. And wow, if you like reading nonfiction books, make notes. Well, maybe this is just me, but I forget everything. And the nonfiction books that I have notes on, it makes a world of a difference. Then I have a book that I don't think anyone has read, but that I just want to mention because I think it's very fun. Here's a little story, okay? So I was going to this like book swap. This was about 2 years ago maybe. And there were basically, everyone just had some books wrapped up in wrapping paper and then just a little explanation written on top of it, the way you would have with the blind date in a bookstore. And there were like a few books. Someone just took a bunch of books from like the romance section in a thrift store, and me and my friends all decided to take one of the books, and I took one of them with me, and it turned out to be the book The Dog Walker. And I just want to talk about it because it was just so funnily bad. This is about a woman who walks dogs. You know, she has a dog walking service, and she falls in love with the owner of one of the dogs she walks, but she hasn't actually met him because the thing with dog walking is that you just go and get the dog when the owner's already out of town. And she like falls in love with him through like the stuff that she sees in his house and through all the things she gets to know about him by going through his stuff, which, yes, indeed sounds a lot like just straight up problematic stalker behavior. But don't tell the book that, because the book really likes you to believe that this is very romantic and it's just all very, you know, dramatic because they haven't met each other yet, but she's in love with him. It was a ridiculous book and I had so much fun reading it. I don't recommend it. There's like a scene after she's finally met the owner where she sleeps with him, but then later it turns out she was actually sleeping with his twin. I can't even begin to explain how much is wrong with that. It was bad. I gave it 2 stars, but I did have a good time. Next up, we have a YA sci-fi duology that I read a while ago and that I never talk about, but that I do have a lot of opinions on, and that is Warcross by Marie Lu. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that in January I kind of went through a cyberpunk phase where I was just watching all the cyberpunk movie. I was really into it. Blade Runner 2049 is one of my new favorite movies of all time. I don't really read a lot of science fiction books, but there's just something about sci-fi movies that just hits different to me. I'm now one of those people that loves the very specific group of movies, which is Blade Runner, Arrival, Ex Machina, and Annihilation. I mean, Blade Runner is the only one of these that's actually like cyberpunk, but I also watched some other cyberpunk movies, and I was thinking back to when I read Warcross and I realized, hey, that book is technically a cyberpunk story. It's mostly cyberpunk just in aesthetic, not really in content, only kind of, but it does have the cyberpunk vibes. You know, it takes place in like futuristic Tokyo and New York. We have our main character who is like a 17-year-old bounty hunter and also a genius hacker, and she gets invited to play in this virtual esports game where it's like virtual reality capture the flag, basically. It's super action-packed, so much fun, so many great side characters of the characters that are in her virtual esports team. One of the major side characters is in a wheelchair, and I really appreciated seeing a disabled character in a badass role. It may have a very predictable plot twist, but it's okay. I loved this first book. Gave it 4 stars, easiest 4 stars I've ever given. But then the second book, big letdown in my opinion, which is why I have a really hard time recommending this series to people, because I would recommend the first book It's just that the second book is a letdown. The story just takes a completely different turn. We don't really get a lot of the virtual reality anymore. And the main character, who was very active in the first book, becomes very passive in the second book and mostly just listens to people explaining a lot of backstory to her. So that's my overall opinion on this book. I don't know if I would recommend it. Maybe just read the first book. And then I have read a few years ago one of the very famous self-help books, which is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. This is an extremely popular self-help book that is supposedly not like other self-help books. And it really uses the fact that it's not like other self-help book as a marketing thing. So it really is a pick-me book. I don't really read like the traditional self-help books, but I did really enjoy this one. It wasn't like groundbreaking or anything, but I do remember just enjoying my time reading it. I gotta admit though that I don't really remember much of what was said. One big negative point that I do want to point out is that this book is completely anecdotal. It's just the writer's own experiences and he's just kind of like a big brother that's sharing his life experiences with you. I noticed there are a lot of moments that he mentions psychology but never provides a source. I just had a lot of doubts. I also noticed that he talks about philosophers very often, and even me with my very limited knowledge of philosophy noticed that he was often like kind of misrepresenting or misinterpreting these philosophers. So, you know, take everything in this book with a grain of salt. But I did learn a few things. I did make notes on this one for some reason. What I mostly took from this book is to, you know, remind yourself that failure can also be progress. There's kind of this idea in modern times that mediocrity is the new failure. And he's like, don't fall for that. It's a trap. You can be mediocre sometimes. It's okay. Not everything has to be perfect. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Next up, we have another super popular book 2 years ago. And that is Circe by Madeline Miller, which, by the way, I was wondering, everyone pronounced it Circe, but I'm pretty sure like the official Greek pronunciation of this mythical figure is Kirke, which sounds kind of awful. Everyone calls it Circe, so maybe I'm wrong. I thought it was Kirke. I'm just gonna call it Circe for now. So this is the story of Circe, who is a mythical figure that plays a role in, I think, the Odyssey, but this is centering her as a main character as she is banished from her family and has to live on this island where she just lives her life as the witch of the island, meeting a bunch of people, you know, turning a bunch of men into pigs. Just the normal stuff. It took me a really long time to get into this book because it's just kind of just like someone's life story and there's not a lot of plot, but in the end I ended up really enjoying it. It really was like a story that you could just completely sink into. Makes me want to live on the island, you know, live my Animal Crossing life, you know, live my Stardew Valley life. I'm basically just saying this because I want to play Stardew Valley. I've been obsessed with Stardew Valley. This has nothing to do with the video, but I just want to let you guys know that when I finish filming this video, I will immediately start playing Stardew Valley. I gave this book like 3.5 stars. It was nice. Would recommend. If this is still on your bookshelf because you bought it when it was super hyped 2 years ago, I do definitely think it's still worth a read. Then I have like 2 little nonfiction books. Actually just one first. When about 2 years ago I was in like a year-long reading slump. This was the first book that got me back into reading slowly, and it's also the first nonfiction book that I picked up that made me interested in reading more nonfiction, and that is Ikigai by Frances Miralles and Hector Garcia. Originally Spanish, but it has been translated into English, and this is a Dutch copy. Basically, this is just like a super easy to read nonfiction book about these 2 authors that go to this island, Okinawa, in Japan, where apparently the people just get really old, like older than other parts of the world, and they have interviews with these people and they kind of, you know, they talk about how these people live their lives, and the idea is that the people, all of the people on this island have this idea of an ikigai, like a life's purpose, and if you have your life purpose you will live a very long life, and it's kind of about how do you find your life purpose. It's a very wholesome, heartwarming, easy to read book. They go into some very light science, but they've clearly done their research. And then the last book that I want to talk about today is the one that I think I get the most requests for, that I get the most comments for. I get comments of people all the time asking me, telling me to read Mistborn. But the thing is, I have, in fact, already read The Final Empire. I even have a review for it, which I don't recommend watching. It's very old. But since so many people ask me about this book, assuming that I haven't read it yet, I thought that right here I could just reiterate what my opinions on that book was. Words. So if you don't know, The Final Empire is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, which is super hyped. It's by Brandon Sanderson, super hyped adult fantasy author, and as a lover of fantasy, of course, I should be reading Brandon Sanderson, so I completely understand that all of you are constantly asking me about it. But yeah, I did read this book about 5 years ago. When I was 18 years old, I read The Final Empire. And the reason I never talked about this book or continued the series is because I just had very mixed opinions. Let me just explain. So the pros of this book, from what I can remember, is that I really liked just the plot and the world building. Of course, it has a really cool magic system. That's what it's known for. I loved just the way the plot played out, the plot twists, everything. I had a good time. I think I remember saying in that review that the last 50 pages were like one of the best things I had ever read. I will admit, I don't remember anything about that anymore, but then again, it was 5 years ago. But the cons of this book, first off, I had an extremely hard time getting into this book. It took me really long to just get into the story, which is probably not really the book's fault, but more so my fault, because I do remember reading this when I was like in a reading slump and had like a really stressful university week, but it did impact my overall enjoyment of the book. And the second thing, which personally was like the biggest reason that I didn't like love this book, and that is the way that Brandon Sanderson writes. The way Brandon Sanderson writes made it that I just could not connect to these characters, and that is because Brandon Sanderson doesn't really give you a lot of the internal world of the characters or their reactions or their emotions. Like, there were so many situations that to me were like very like crucial character situations. Like there would be a character death or like a romantic moment, and I was just like, what are these characters thinking? What is their reaction to them? And Brandon Sanderson just doesn't give it. He just describes the situation as it happens without going into how the characters are feeling or how they are reacting to that, and I need that in order to feel connected to the characters. And I was annoyed throughout this book that I was like, come on, Brandy Sandy, give me something. Like, there were so many moments that really important things were happening, and I just felt distance from the situation and from the characters just because of Brandon Sanderson's writing style, which is of course not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, clearly a lot of people love the way that he writes. Personally, I just didn't vibe with it, and that's also the reason that I never really continued his books, because obviously his writing style is gonna remain the same in all of his books, I assume. So that's why. But like I said in my last video all about series and series that I still want to finish, I do think I want to try some Brandon Sanderson again at some point in the future, because I do want to know what all the hype is about. And also, of course, it's been 5 years, so who knows, my opinion could be completely different now. And that was it. Did you have a good time having a good old-fashioned little sit-down talky video about some books? And did you hydrate? Anyway, if you enjoyed what you saw in this video and you haven't subscribed yet, definitely do, or leave a like. As always, follow me on social media if you just want more of my little bookish and non-bookish ramblings. You know, if you want to hear me talk about Stardew Valley, for example. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon in another video. Goodbye!